if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of dry leaves without a sound. You come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere but in this place, beginning to lead everywhere. Request to stop what you are doing right now, and to stop what you are becoming. While you do it, questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away.
Kenneth Patton was a humanist Unitarian minister who also served the experimental Universalist Charles Street Meeting House in Boston. He reimagined Universalism in the 1950s as a faith that embraces universal values and cultures, drawing spiritual inspiration from many sources. His words, which we usually sing as, "Let this be a house of peace," express the inquiring nature of our faith. Unitarian Universalist songwriter Jim Scott was inspired by Patton's words and wrote this version. Let this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, of sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for question and our inspiration. Let this be a house of freedom, guardian of dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house of freedom, Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences here shall not divide us. Let all in this house seek truth, where scientists and mystics abide in reverence here. Let this, our house, a house of our creation, where works of art and melodies consecrate the atmosphere. Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house of myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradle of our tender dreams.
Cannot get to all of them. Some of them were similar, and I'll read the ones that were similar so you can see how they were similar. And some I'll read, but I'll say, and I'll tackle this another time. Because the question is one that we can have a whole service about. But there were three questions that were very similar. One, I'll read them all three together. How can a church be so open to everything and have a central tenet? Doesn't openness run afoul of having a central organizing idea, or is that the UU way? What does it mean not to have a central creed? What are the implications? And actually those two were the next one is a little bit different. So let me just tackle that first one. Yeah, you know, some people, a lot of people believe that you have to have a central creed to hold your faith together. That you all have to think exactly alike and agree on a set of ideas without question. That's not how we operate. We are in a space of saying there are many ways of looking at the world, there are many ways of understanding things, and that what holds us together, what is our central tenet, is not a belief system, but a covenant. A covenant is what holds us together as very diverse people. There are people sitting here right now who identify as Christian, some who identify as humanists or atheists. There are some who identify more in the Buddhist camp. There are some pagans among us. There are people who aren't sure. Maybe they've never been part of a church before, and they don't identify with anything in particular. And yet, we covenant to be together, to explore, to discuss, and be respectful and loving about it, and to live into our faith in a covenantal way. This covenantal sense goes back, of course, to the very beginnings of the Jewish and Christian traditions, covenants with God that were made as part of the Hebrew Bible. But in America, covenantal behavior became important as people were coming over on that Mayflower and the other ships that came with. And those folks recognized that what they needed to do was live well together and walk together, come what may. That's what holds us together. It is not a common belief, because we do honor the fact that there are many beliefs among us. So it's just, I'm of course giving Cliff Notes answers today, just for perspective. Let's see what it says. Unitarians believe in one God. Universalists believed in universal salvation. True. I mean, if you had to sum things up, that's one way of summing it up. It says, today, merged, the UU Church welcomes even atheists like me. Very true. I said, how and when did this transition occur? I can answer this question. This is the deal. Think of the age of enlightenment, you know, the 1700s and then heading into the 1800s. People weren't only making scientific discoveries, but were also critically starting to look at the Bible with a critical eye, especially German theologians. They got their hands on all kinds of ancient texts and were reading them and realizing, oh, there are inconsistencies in the Bible all over the place, etc. And they began to question how that document got pulled together, and then they were pretty doggone clear in their own minds. This was not necessarily the Word of God, but the work of many people over time, without consistency necessarily, or I shouldn't say without consistency, with some inconsistencies in various stories. And so our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors were the folks who were among the first following these German theologians to go, I think Jesus was a human. I think Jesus was an exemplary human. I'm not so sure about the Son of God part, the Christ part. Virgin birth? Not too sure about that. Miracles? Not too sure about the miracle stories either. And so there was this questioning that happened. So think of this as being in the early to mid 1800s. And then, as our nation expanded westward out to places like Utah, okay, the folks who moved from the East Coast were not only seeking a new life, they were also people who, by definition, mostly were questioners. They were like, we don't necessarily need to be doing everything we did back east. We can be in a different kind of church. And so a lot of the Western Unitarian churches, in particular, had a humanist story going in the late 1800s, in the mid to late 1800s. They called themselves the free religious people, free religionists. They were free of what was going on back east. And part of that freedom was to start thinking new about things and welcoming people who were doubters, welcoming the doubters. So you have that going on. And then fast forward just a bit into the early 20th century. Think of what was going on exactly 100 years ago. World War I, the Great War. That war so horrified people around the globe that many intellectuals, including many Unitarian and Universalist ministers, said no loving God would have ever allowed that kind of carnage to occur, that kind of horror to occur. So we doubt the existence of God. And so they developed what was called the Humanist Manifesto. And the Humanist Manifesto was signed in 1933 in Chicago by a group of luminary intellectuals at that time, many of whom were Unitarian and Universalist ministers. And they were declaring, we're not sure about any kind of God beyond what we see in humanity, but what we do know is that goodness can prevail and that justice can prevail and people can treat each other well. We have the capacity for that. We have the capacity for the horror, but we have the capacity for the good. So let us bring that forth. Let us cultivate that in our societies. So that humanist kind of message spread like wildfire through a lot of both the Unitarian and the Universalist congregations during the 20th century. And in fact, many Unitarian congregations that were founded in the 1950s in the wake of World War II were quite humanist-based and really kind of stepped away from the original Christian background of our faith. So there was quite a bit of that atheist welcome. We want to be in community with one another, and we want to promote justice in our communities. We want to live well together. We want our kids to learn good ethical values. And oh, by the way, we like to just get together and have a good time. And so that energy from the 1950s has moved forward now all the way till now. And so that is one reason that progression of things is why we sit in this theological big tent here this morning with a lot of different kinds of people from a lot of different kinds of backgrounds, including our humanists and our atheists. Now let's see what is next one. Oh, please explain the UU connection to Transylvania. Yeah, because a lot of people, what's the first thing you think of when you think of Transylvania? Be honest. Vampires, right. And of course, I mean, because that's the legend there. But here's the Cliff Notes version on that as well, because in January, we're going to have a whole service about this. Because in January, it is the 450th anniversary of what was known as the Diet of Torda, Torda being a city in Transylvania. And that was the place where the very first document of religious tolerance and freedom was ever created on our planet. And it was under the watch of the one and only Unitarian king, King Sigismund of Transylvania. Okay? So think of the time of the Reformation. Europe was in a turmoil. Everywhere. Serious craziness. When people said the Catholic Church was corrupt, all the different versions of the Reformation went wild across the continent. It was intense. And people were killing each other over it, left and right. But Transylvania was in an interesting place, geographically and spiritually. There were various forms of Christianity there, but there were also strong Jewish influences and strong Islamic presence as well. It was definitely a multicultural society. And they talked about it together, and they made a choice to live together in peace. Now, I can already tell you that they didn't live together in peace forever. But there was a bit of golden time there, some decades, where there was religious tolerance. But we will be, in January is the 450th anniversary of Transylvanian Unitarianism. And we're going to talk a lot about that in January. So come back in January. Seriously, it's worthy of learning more and having a great celebration of that. And that's why we have partner churches. We currently do not have a partner church relationship in Transylvania, but many of our sister congregations do across the U.S. and Canada. And because in Transylvania itself, the primary religion there is Unitarian Christianity. So if we whisked ourselves magically there this very morning, we would be with our siblings in faith there. They are more Christian than us, but they are definitely in the God is one. And remember that one of their ministers, who you'll hear more about in January, his anglicized name is Francis David. He is the one who said, "We need not think alike to love alike," which I think encapsulates a lot about our faith. We need not think alike to love alike. So come back in January. We're gonna really Transylvania it up. I'm even saying, I'm going out on a limb right now and saying, I think we ought to have a night of Transylvanian food and music and learning about our friends in faith. And by the way, the other thing you might not know, there are annual pilgrimages of UUs to Transylvania. And you don't have to be part of a particular congregation to do this. We can post information about it so that you can learn more. I have many friends that have gone over to Transylvania. They've spent 2 or 3 weeks. They stay with folks in those congregations. They travel around and they see some of these very famous places in our faith's history, and they learn a lot. And they also learn about the realities of the current day Transylvanian Unitarians, because even though they're the dominant faith in that part of Transylvania, Transylvania is now part of Romania, and in Romania as a whole, they are a persecuted minority. And when I say persecuted, I honestly mean persecuted. So there's a whole justice side of things with that too. See, more than you bargained for when you ask that question. Here's one. It says, do Unitarians have any beliefs that are similar to the saints? And I'm assuming that this person means Latter-day Saints. I don't know for sure. Maybe is the person who asked that question, is that what you meant?
I meant more like the way Catholics have belief in the saints.
Oh, like Catholic saints.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a different question. See, saints has such a multiple bit of meanings here in this state. So I'm glad I asked that clarification. So do we believe in saints? Well, you know what's an interesting question about that? In the sense of saints, like the Christian saints, I would say probably not. However, I think we have people in our faith that get referred to as saints. They're people who are exemplars of our faith and that get lifted up from and it's all over the lot, because usually when you think of saints, you think of people who died for their faith. Okay, we had people who were martyred for their faith. For example, Michael Servetus, who I preached about a few months ago, who wrote a book called On the Error of the Trinity, and he was burned at the stake by John Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland. Yeah, he died for our faith. Now, I don't know that martyrs and saints are the same. I don't think they are, but Servetus gets mentioned. Francis David, that I mentioned, the Transylvanian guy, he ultimately got killed too. Again, he died for the faith. But then there's other kinds of saints that I think that our faith lifts up, that don't necessarily people who died for our faith, but people who are exemplars of our values. And it's Thomas Starkane is one. And we talked about Thomas Starkane a few months ago now. We've been talking about how he was a Universalist minister who came up to serve a Unitarian church in San Francisco just at the time the Civil War was breaking out, and how he not only was amazing in his ministry there, but he traveled up and down the state of California to get California to stay in the Union and not go with the Confederate side. And he was an exemplar of living your values. People like Susan B. Anthony. Mm-hmm. Susan B. Anthony was a Unitarian. She was a member at the First Unitarian Church in Rochester, New York. Her work, of course, and for women's suffrage and women's rights is known by many, many, many. People like Clara Barton on the Universalist side of the family. Clara Barton was raised in a Universalist family and believed in universal salvation and believed in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And that's why she was the angel of the battlefield in the Civil War, ministering health care and death care to people on all sides of the conflict. And then she also went on to found the American Red Cross, of course, because that was an organization that at the time was radical, because it said, if there's a disaster, everyone gets aid. Not just the wealthy people living up on the hill. Everyone who's affected in the community gets aid and deserves aid to recover from a disaster, from a flood, from a fire, from a whatever. So it's people who've lived into their values. So perhaps sometime we'll do a service where we'll invite people to share who they think their UU saint is. Yeah. And even though it's not saint, kind of goes with a little plug for next week. Next week is Wonder Woman. We're going to talk about her universalism. And there is both Unitarianism and Universalism in the deep backstory behind Wonder Woman. So come in costume. Seriously. We're going to go there. Let's see. Say, what beliefs about life after death are held in this faith? That is a big question. It's one of the big questions that all faiths ask. It's the classic question that goes with what Gauguin said back in the late 1800s when he said, where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? In other words, what is our fate after our death? I know that there are many faiths that have an exact answer for that. They can tell you exactly what happens, whether it's heaven or hell or some other answer. We don't have a specific answer. Our answer is that is a deep question that you yourself can ponder, and that we are a safe space to come and talk about possibilities and questions and concerns and what we think about that topic. And we do that from time to time. There are some among us who are quite literalists, that we're biological. When we take our last breath, that's it. That's it. There's no more. There are some sitting right here in this room that I know are waiting to be reunited with loved ones of heaven, however heaven is conceived. And there are some that wish, perhaps, I say wish, that there might be some people that roast a bit. Yeah, but I think that we're a faith that's more about creating heaven on earth, knowing that we already have a bit of hell right here, sometimes more than our fair share. And so our faith is more concerned with what happens in this life than what happens after we're gone. But it's a very good and profound question to ask. And I'm glad, whoever asked this question, I'm glad that you asked the question, because it is something that we all think about. And I know as I get more chronologically gifted, I think about it more than I used to. It's like, wow, do I have to do some catching up to do before the final time? I don't know. So, what time are we going to be? I think we have time maybe for one. There's more questions here than I can answer. And I'm aware that these good questions are going to be some good fodder for some future services. So if I didn't get to your personal question today, know that they're going to be covered. So stay tuned in future services. And there were two questions I'll end with that are a little bit more. They were similar. And I'm not sure what my answer is, but I'm going to give it a shot. Here's the two questions. After reading everything about General Assembly, I felt optimistic about the future of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Was I there, and how do I feel about our future? Yes, I was there. Yes, I do have an opinion. And the other question, this corollary, is Thomas Jefferson said that he believed 100 years from now, nearly everyone would be Unitarian. Yeah. He said, where do you believe the UU Church will be 100 years from now? Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa. And so these are both questions about the future. I will tell you this. I don't know where we're going to be 100 years from now, but think 100 years past. If we were sitting here in 1917, if that was possible, we would be sitting in we would have either been in a Unitarian or Universalist church. We wouldn't have been in a UU church. But either one of those, pick your side of the family you want to be on. You would have been sitting in a Christian church, but a Christian church that did not use Trinitarian language, and a Christian church that had a lot of readings that talked more about the brotherhood of man, because, women were all included in brotherhood at that time. So it would have been a lot of brotherhood of man talk back then. That would have been your context. And you would have been out in the community working on some of the social justice issues of the day, especially suffrage. You would have been hot on suffrage. During your coffee hour, you would have been signing petitions. And you would have women in white sashes saying, can you come to our parade or rally next Saturday? That's what was happening 100 years ago in our churches. So 100 years from now and in the future, what do I see? I don't know. I mean, those people 100 years ago could have never conceived of our theological big tents sitting here, and that we'd be coming kind of casual, that the minister would have sandals on with no hose. Actually, they wouldn't have conceived of a woman being in the pulpit at all. They so it's hard for me to really truly imagine. But what I can tell you is this, from being a General Assembly. There was, and you're going to hear more about this, by the way, on August 13th. Heidi Cotton, our board president, Carlene Valentine, our church administrator, and I were all there. We're going to do a joint service. We're going to talk to you about our experience. So come back on that Sunday. You're going to hear a lot of details. But in the meanwhile, what I can tell you is this. Just like those people in 1917 couldn't possibly conceive where we are now. The shift I was feeling at General Assembly this year was one of saying, yes, our faith and white people in general need to get real about racism in our nation and our world. And how we progress with that will make a huge difference in where we end up. But there was a huge groundswell of support for that notion. You're going to be hearing a lot more about that, because that is the underlying original sin, if you want to call it that, of America. And we're as complicit as anybody in that. Having our faith come to grips with that and seeing where that takes us on our journey is going to be what the work of the next 100 years will be. And our youngest ones, who are off with Starling right now, may live to see some of the fruits of that labor. And in the meanwhile, we are all called to work in that vineyard together. You're going to be hearing us say a lot more about not only racism, but other kinds of oppression. And that is our work to do as people of faith. As people of faith. And I have one very quick thing to read to you before we end entirely here. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke, many, many years ago, wrote a letter to a young poet. And in that letter, there was a small excerpt that's been used many times, but it really is apt for our faith. Rilke said, "Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers, which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, even without noticing it, live your way into the answer." May it be so.